One. Welcome to the Shire of Southkeep. We are the most southern shire of the Kingdom of Trimaris. And today we have as a guest instructor, Honorable Lord Augustine Winter, who comes to us from the Barony of Oldenfeld, which is the northern part of Trimaris. So we're coming at you from opposite angles of our kingdom. And our subject today is art side research and documentation for the novice level. Thank you so much, Honorable Lord Augustine, for joining us.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming. It's a pleasure to be invited to teach. I am currently the art sci officer for the Barony of Oldenfeld, which, as Guillermo mentioned, is in the very north part of our kingdom. And art sci is something that is near and dear to my heart and has been since my very first moments in society. So it's a privilege to be here to talk to you guys today. If you have any questions, feel free to speak up during the presentation. I don't mind fielding them. If it's occurring to you, it may be occurring to somebody else. So, and if it's something we'll get to, then we'll address it later on. If not, we'll address it now. So I'm open for, however I can provide you guys the information is happy with me. So to start off, one of the questions that I field a lot when I'm talking to people about art sci is, why should this be important to me? What is it about art sci? Because we have new people that come into society and they see all these wonderful things that we do and they want to get involved with them, but they don't really know how. And then we also have members that have been around for long enough to hear some of the horror stories about the way things used to be, or someone that had a bad experience in art sci. And I've kind of had a mixed road. So teaching this class has become one of my favorite things because I've learned through trial and experience kind of some of the do's and the don'ts. I will say that my journey, as Master Miklos has described it in society, has been unique. So some of the challenges that I bring up may or may not be something you encounter. But it's fun to have the discussion, and so you can kind of understand what to expect and some of the whys. So to share a little of my background, before I joined society, I was an internationally awarded amateur mead maker. So of course society appealed to me because I make mead and I don't drink, so I have to have something to do with all the mead, right? Which automatically made me the most popular person at the party, which isn't a spot that I'm used to. But I made a mistake coming into art sci, and that was with my thought process right off the beginning, because there's a difference between mundane crafting and creating an object for art sci within society. And some of that's what we'll get into today. But my first art sci competition, I took one of my traditional meads that I had international success with, and I dropped it straight into an art sci competition. Imagine my surprise when my score sheet came back and it was a little less than I had expected to see, which I made the mistake of taking personally. So part of my learning journey became, from the start, understanding some of those differences between mundane crafting and art sci in the society realm. So we'll talk a little bit more about that when we start getting into your project selection and things like that. So why art sci? Well, because it's fun. Art sci has a little bit of something for everybody. When you think about heavy fighting, when you think about rapier, anything like that, you get on the field, but the idea is to win. You know, you get into a tournament and everybody wants to have fun, but at the end of the day, in that fight competition, you really want to take home the first prize. Art side's not always that way. If you're a competitive person, there is space for that. And if you want to make the run and be Gulf War's grand champion, awesome. If you want to learn more about a particular art area, that works as well. If you want to develop contacts and network in an area of interest, you can do that also. You can do all these things. They're not mutually exclusive. So myth number one that I kind of like to address with Art Sci is it's not all about the competition. It's about the learning process. It's about the journey. And it's about showing off some cool stuff. So let's talk first about Novice, because that's where we're here today, right? Is the novice level, entry level project. Where do I get started? I've heard the horror story that I have to write a thesis, and I am horrible at writing. I'm horrible at research. I don't want to write a book. You don't have to do that. And I'll show you some of the stuff that we have here that's specific to Trimaris, but most kingdoms have their own version of some of this. It gives you a guide, and it's not about writing a thesis. It can be if you want it to be. But again, like anything else in society, it's kind of play to your level of comfort. So where do most of us get started in Art Sci? I see a hand up. Oh no, that's not a hand. That's my own mouse. Sorry. I chased a squirrel there. Who's got an area of interest that would be willing to speak up and you know, what's drawing you to Art Sci? What has you guys attending this class today?
I just want to become more familiar with how to document your project. I have not had to do any kind of college report in more years than I care to admit. So for me to get back out here and overcome challenges like a slow computer at home, or just simply not knowing where to go to find something extant that would document lately I've been knitting like relic pouches. And it's just been by happenstance that I ran across different document material from what other people shared with me. It wasn't because I knew how to go out and find my own documentation. So when I had reached out to a couple of museums, they're not a whole lot of help if you don't know what to ask. And they didn't have the specific type of pouch that I had seen a picture of. I didn't know where to go find that. So that's why I'm here today. As a novice, I'd like to do Art Sci. I'm not too hung up on, you know, worrying about what my score is, but I would like to show off my hard work, and I don't know how to document it. I just don't know where to go, how to start, what to do. So here I am.
Okay, sounds good. Is that pretty much universal across the board for everybody? Does anybody else have another angle on that? Cool. So let's start out selection, because that's going to inform some of the rest of our discussion today. One of the mistakes that I have seen a number of times, and I say mistake, and I use this lovingly because I've done it and I've seen others do it. And it's what I call an ex post facto project, where you've made something cool and somebody comes up to you and says, hey, that thing's cool. That should be an Art Sci project. The first meet that I entered was a perfect example of that. When I was creating it, I was not, and when I say the Art Sci mindset, I was not approaching it from the angle of showing the judges what they wanted to see, rather than here's a cool object, let me do the documentation as an afterthought. So when we're figuring out where to start from, figuring out the cool thing that you want to try to make, of course, is primary. But then starting to document some of the things I'm going to show you before you actually go down the road of making the project is going to be key. Because if you make the project first, and then your research starts informing you that maybe there were different materials, maybe there was a different methodology, you find yourself explaining why your project is different. And as one of my former bosses said, if you're explaining, you're losing. So it's easier to figure out where you're going up front and then build the project knowing the compromises that you're making in material choice or methodology or anything like that than it is to make the object and then go back to try to explain why you didn't do it that way when we didn't get there originally. So the first piece of advice I would have there is no ex post facto projects. So figuring out where to start. Each kingdom, one thing you said there that I want to reflect on is writing a college paper. If you try to think of art sci documentation, especially at the novice and journeyman level, as more of a magazine article, there is a category for research papers, but the reality of it is when you're attending an art sci event, a regional, a kingdom level art sci event, and you're submitting something for judging, your judges aren't going to have enough time to read through, you know, a college level book report on whatever it is you're showing them. And as such, they may end up missing some key discoveries or pieces of your journey that really are neat or unique or informative about your piece, but we just didn't have the time to read all that documentation because of the sheer volume of entries. And the other reason that I say to think about it more of like a magazine article than a college report is most of the time the judges and your populace and your nobility and everybody else that's drawn to see what this thing you made is, they aren't going to know the basics of what it is you're doing. If you're doing knitting, you might, you know, knitting's a more common art. You might be lucky and you might get a knitting laurel that is judging your project. Odds are you might get a brewing laurel and a leatherworking laurel. So in the presentation of the information, too much information is sometimes not working in your favor. The other thing that's interesting to note is that at any level of competition, you can come into a competition with unanswered questions. One of the least frequent areas that I've seen on this documentation that I'm about to show you, when I've judged projects, has been an area that allows you to ask questions to your judges. And a lot of times I don't see that utilized to the extent that I think people could use it if they knew that it was an option. So having said that, let me jump into, I'm going to do screen share here. Maybe share screen. And let's go over here. And I will show you, for those of you in Trimaris, this is an important area for you to be familiar with. This is our trimaris.org Kingdom website. You can get to these pages that I'm showing you from officers and arts and sciences. So you're going to have all this information here. So let's talk about choosing category. You can see here we've got novice, journeyman, and masterwork. So what's the difference? Why do we choose one over the other? Novice, as you can see here, I'm not going to read it to you. First time entrance, if you're new to the process, exploring a new art. In Trimaris, this level is not going to be eligible to go to Gulf Wars for Gulf Wars championships. So if that's your ultimate goal with the first project we're talking about, good luck. You'll have to enter it at a higher level. For novice, the way I look at it is a balance between project skill and experience in documentation. If you're really super good at your art, but you don't know the expectations of research and documentation yet, novice is a good place to start. If you were, a research focused person and you've got a PhD, but you've never picked up a pair of knitting needles before, novice might be a good place to start. The judges can always reclassify your project to another level if they feel they can reclassify up. They're not going to reclassify you down. So if you turn in something and it's very obvious that the documentation and work, this should be a master level project, they're going to take a look at judging you at a master level. But if you turn in something at master level and the judges look at it and they're kind of like, maybe not, you're going to get judged at master level. So make sure, you can always go up, but you can't necessarily go back down. So let's look at this. I'm just going to pick one of these. These are different types of documentation that we have for research paper and all these different kinds of entries, but we'll look at the static entry here, static and consumables. So this is literally it for documentation. Does it have to be on this form? No. But the form's there to help you and guide you and show you what you need to do. At its simplest, how you get started in ArtSci is you tell us what you're making, where did it come from, when did it come from, who would have used it. For source of inspiration, what is it about this thing? Was there an extant that got your attention? For whatever your source of inspiration is. What materials or ingredients you used? Why did you choose them? What tools or equipment did you use? How did you make it? What sources did you use? And do you have any questions? That's literally ArtSci documentation at novice level right there. You'll notice it doesn't go into tons and tons and tons of detail. If you want at novice level, if you want to go through the trouble of justifying every single tool, decision, material that you made and compare it to an extant, knock yourself out. But at novice level, it's not necessary. This is an introduction. This is a learning process. So source of inspiration is important. If you are making a copy of something, copying is period. I love calligraphy. I'm a horrible illuminator. All of my illuminations are copies of extants. I will credit the original, but every illumination that I've entered into a competition has been rendering my version of an existing illumination. So if you're making, like an example, leather working, if you're making the leather bucket that came from the Mary Rose, then describe that there, put the photocopies in. Pictures are great. Photographs, computer printout, other format, things to be aware. Well, we'll get to that in a second. The materials or ingredients you used in the project. So what did you use? At novice level, you're not expected to go from, mining your own iron and getting that all the way to the end project of you making a knife. At novice level, then just describe how you sourced and why you made the choices you made. As you go up in levels, there are things that will kind of allow you excuses for using non-period materials, tools, or processes. If they're too expensive, I'm the only one working in a house of 6 people right now. If you expected me to buy a bunch of real gold leaf for a project, It's probably not going to happen. So I have to make a conscious decision. But I've explained, the cost, the materials are too costly. The materials are illegal. Trying to get ivory right now to carve for an ivory project would not really be something we'd be trying to do. Or the materials are harmful for, I can make a period brewing recipe, but some of that stuff I don't want to drink, and I'm not going to recommend that my judges do it either. So you can make compromises for known hazards, and you can also make compromises to fill in the blanks on stuff. If you've done as much research and as much looking as you can, and you just cannot find out why they did this process in a particular way, then it's okay to say, I've researched this to the extent of my capability, and I don't know why they did it this way. So I'm choosing to do it this way because it approximates where I want to get on my goal. And you see the word briefly here. Briefly is going to be the key. Because this is a novice level. You're just introducing me to your project. The tools and equipment that you used in creating the project, if you need to use mundane tools, that's okay. Everything kind of slides in ArtSci on a sliding scale. Can you do an ArtSci project with completely modern equipment, tools, and materials? Sure you can. Probably not going to score out very high at master level doing that. At novice level, it's probably not going to hem you up that badly, especially if you're in the process of learning, because, hold on, sorry, my up along behind here. So are you going to survive?
I burped.
Okay,
And
thank
then
you.
the sauce
Give me a
came
second.
out from-
You hear me now? Can't tell if I'm. Hello?
We hear you fine.
And it's not giving me the little green ring, so had to redirect my dying son who's choking on dinner to my to my wife. I was on this. Tools or equipment used in creating it, and what methodology did you use to create it? What sources did you use? It's pretty straightforward. And here, I cannot stress enough for a novice entry, this last portion. Do you have any questions about this project or future similar projects that you'd like the panel of judges to answer for you? I have researched this all the way. I cannot figure out what this red pigment they would have used for this project is. If somebody has some resources, I would appreciate it. The judges can track down a Laurel that may know, point you in the right direction, and help get that information for you. Each kingdom may or may not have their own version of this documentation form. They have documentation forms that are all the way up to master level. When you're at master level, these forms may or may not be a good idea, but they're always a great guide. If I'm judging a novice and I see it on this form, I'm happy because I know everything that I'm going to want to see is covered. So any questions on the form? All right. So what kind of stuff can I make? There is a category for almost everything. And on the form, you'll see you have category and division. The category and division, this is where it comes in. These are in alphabetical. So you have division, subdivision, category, and this will guide you on what area that your item fits into. So bookbinding shows you here. This is one that we like to do in my household. My wife does mundane bookbinding and I do period bookbinding. So it's a perfect combination. So you'd be in division 4, which is sciences or studio arts and sciences. Paper arts is going to be your subdivision. And then your category there would be bookbinding. So finding what category is important because you'll have it on the form. You can get a hold of the judging rubrics, and I recommend doing that, especially at higher levels, because you can compare your project against the judging rubric and make sure you've got all the questions answered in your documentation form. So any questions on categories or the forms there?
Yes. Would you be able to? Yeah, thank you. I was wanting to find that link and save it on my computer so I can go back and review it.
So you got it in the chat. Here,
Yeah,
I'll copy it down there for everyone.
thank you.
So there's the how to enter. And then I will go back to the Google Drive. And that is Trimaris's forms there. And a lot of this one here, the link to the Office of Arts and Sciences has a lot of good information here on where to get started. How-tos right here. This one I'm particularly fond to, the practical how-to on entering ArtSci, because that's written by my Laurel and her Laurel. So that's my mom and my grandma that wrote that one. But it's great information. It backs up what we're talking about today. The getting started rules and resources is a good one. And then these are research and citation aids. So let's jump into the research part now. And that is, okay, I think I want to make, we'll say, an illumination, or I want to do some calligraphy. Where do I get started? So the project that I'm working on right now, I'll use it as an example. I love calligraphy. I've done calligraphy for several years now. I am terrible at illumination. Public admission, but yes, I'm horrible at it. If you ask me to copy a picture of a cat, I can do it all day long. If you ask me to draw one, good luck. It's going to look like a kindergartner did it, which is great for sticking on your fridge, but not so good for ArtSci. So how did I get started on this particular illumination project? I was bored one day and I was looking through the internet at illuminations. I literally did a Google search for medieval illuminations and was just flipping through, and one of them caught my eye. And I'm a systems guy, and I thought, wow, it's something I could figure out. It's very structured, so I could do this one. So then I Googled that illumination to find out where it came from, tracked it back down, found the original manuscript, which is on the website for the French National Library. And then I started figuring out what time period did it come from, what style, what materials, started answering all the questions. And I decided I wanted to give this a try, because before I invested tons of time and money into, am I going to be good at illumination? Can I even do this one? I want to give it a try. You know, I got watercolors, I got rulers, I can do all this stuff here. So that's when I found out that knot work is not as easy as it looks. And it totally blew my mind. So I banged my head against that wall over and over and over, trying to get as much as I could through it and going on. Finally, with the right set of resources and classes, I ended up in a class at Gulf Wars that gave me a place to start, and kind of filled in the blanks for me. And then I was able to start working on my own that turned into a research project that spanned 2 years. So that's the rabbit hole you can end up going down. But it all started from Googling a picture, literally medieval illuminations. So Google is your friend for inspiration. When you start finding resources like this, the V&A is a fabulous one that I like to use for museum collections. More and more museum collections are starting to become available online. The V&A has a wonderful manuscript library. So you can dig through this and you can go back and like, okay, here's a book of hours from 1471, 1476. And different museums will actually even have high-res photographs of a lot of these. So this is where you can go to get started. How many of you guys have ever heard don't use Wikipedia as a source? Has anybody ever done research and been told that?
Yeah, I have.
I'm going to agree with that to a point. And the point is, when people are citing sources in Wikipedia, follow the rabbit trail. Go to their source, figure out where their source used their source. It'll trace you back to some originals a lot of times. So Wikipedia itself, not necessarily a good source to cite, but a good place to start running down where you can find those sources. So the V&A for me, for leatherworking, the Mary Rose Museum is another great one. But be prepared when you're using museums. At the novice level, this is great. This right here, this is a good period one. There's your source of inspiration right there. And so you can research this, explore object in more depth. And it tells us here. We can answer a lot of questions. What is it? It's parchment. When was it? There we go. Let's look back here and let's look at how easily we can answer some of these questions on this novice form now. Okay. Title of entry. What is the item? Whatever you're calling it. If you're duplicating something, then duplicate of, copy of, my version of the original item. At novice level, it's okay. If you're making a copy of something at a higher level of competition, it had better be close. Because if you're putting it forward as a copy or as a duplicate, you'll be held to that standard. At novice level, not such a big deal, but cite your source. If you wanted to make this illumination, knock it out. It's great. Just make sure you're putting where it came from. So category division, we get off of our other form. Title of the entry, country or region it's from. Well, right here we have it. France. Maybe made there. Rene, I don't know. I don't speak French. But we have a country of origin, so we can answer that one. Time period within 50 years. We have that right there, 1471 to 1476. So if we're sitting here handwriting this before we go, intended setting of item. Okay. This was a book of hours made for a specific person. So we have our intended person, right? And this goes to describe everything. Oh, nice. The book binding. Sorry. Happy moment there. The source of inspiration, you have it right here. That picture right there, if that's the one we're using. List the materials or ingredients you used. So if we have a place of origin and we have a period of origin, now we can start doing a little bit of digging and figuring out what pigments were used during that period of time. I know for some of the fiber arts, you can go down the rabbit hole as far, and you'll have to forgive me. I'm not a fiber arts person, so I'm probably going to say some stuff that's out of left field, but I guess it even matters what direction the thread is laying on itself when you're weaving it together, creating the thread. There's directional components to it. Am I correct on that? So if you want to go as far down the rabbit holes to figure out what types of threads and materials of threads, you can start digging. But again, novice level, not necessary. Briefly explain why you chose those materials or ingredients. I found another 14th century. Okay, this one. Why did I choose parchment? The original was on parchment. You're never going to hear me say I chose parchment because the original is on parchment, because parchment is prohibitively expensive for me. Ways around that, I can get others to donate if they're so willing to, or I can make a substitution. In this case, my wife is a college bookbinder. She has French paper available to her. I do mine on French paper. So that's a close approximation. I'm not doing it on copy paper, but you know what? If copy paper is all I could afford, don't let it hold you up. So why did I choose to do it on parchment? Because the original was done on parchment. Why did I choose to do it on copy paper? Because I've got 17 cents to my name and my neighbor gave me some copy paper. Rocket. We have an answer to that question, right? List the tools or equipment you used in creating the project. So what tools or equipment would we have in creating this illumination? Well, we're going to have a brush. We are going to, this one's got gold leaf in it, it looks like. We're going to have a straight edge, right? Something to hold we can go way in on this one. So you can see right there, if I'm just making conjectures off of here, I could make a conjecture that a straight edge was used on this, yes? Because those lines right there are very straight and evenly spaced. So you can see right here that luminescence from the light where they did the photograph. That's going to be the gold leaf around the outside. And then when you're starting to take this up to the next level, I would ask you, this colored writing right here. Has anybody got a guess as to what that is? Do I have any illumination folks in here? Or calligraphers? That's actually going to be written in gold leaf also. And a lot of times you can tell. The other thing that this informs us is looking at this, you can see the back of the other page. So you can see gold leaf and silver leaf are particularly damaging to manuscripts over time. So you can start to make some conjectures like that reflectivity right there is telling me that that's probably a gold leaf border on the outside. Yeah, I see in chat. Pinterest is a great place to start finding images. Do you guys know how to do a reverse image search on Google? Save an image, and then you go to Google. And I can't spell right. And you can search by image right here. Yeah, gold leaf. That's exactly. And in fact, one of my most happy moments as an apprentice was when I was working on that manuscript I was telling you guys about earlier. And my Laurel was giving me a little bit of room to run and do some research that I'm sure she already knew the answers on. And I was able to, on the back side of one of the manuscript pages, determine that this was silver leaf, and she eventually agreed. She's like, wow, that's cool. So yeah, if you go to Google Images, images.google.com, and you find that image that you like, if you're pulling it in from somewhere else, like Pinterest, you can click on search by image, and you can upload. It'll ask you where your target is. I'm not going to do that here because I don't know if my kids have, weird Naruto stuff on here or whatever. But so you click by image, you choose the saved image you want to Google search, and it'll come back and it'll tell you where locations of those will be. A lot of times those will find links to museums and such. Let me see if I can find. Okay, yeah, here we go. All right, so let me go back to here. I'm going to stop sharing screen for just a second while I do this to make sure. Where's desktop? There's desktop and my arts and sciences folder.
So
Okay.
one of the things that you, I think you touched on, but I think it's really an important thing to point out is when something is not as it was in the original, if like in the case, if you're using copy paper because you can't afford it, which is fine as long as you identify in the text that you're using the original would have been parchment. I'm using copy paper because of X, Y, and Z. Just to show that what, and you're knowledgeable of what would have been used.
Yes, and as you go up, the next step up from the very basic is a comparison. It's what did you use? What did they use? As far as materials, as far as tools and equipment. What did they use? What did you use? And if they're not the same, why not? Explanation on each stage along the way will show you. So I'm going to screen share the full screen to show you this. So this is one of the first projects that I did. And this project is where I learned a valuable lesson that not every judge in an art site competition is going to know your art, and B, you have to account for that one judge that just doesn't quite see things the way that everybody else does. This is a subjective process, and your judges are human beings, and sometimes they're not going to score the same. There are safeguards in place at the scoring levels that are supposed to catch if you get that one judge that's really out of line. Sometimes they won't. So let me show you some bits of this project. So what I'm doing is I'm using that reverse Google image search. So what I did for this project is, I can show you this. I'm also doing leatherworking, and I found a picture of an original tennis ball, like one of the first, what was called real tennis or royal tennis back in the day. And I got intrigued, and I'm like, that's cool. There's a lot of things that I think might be neat to make out of that tennis ball. So let's take, okay, if you saw what I did there, Google image, I click on the little camera, upload an image, choose file. And then here's the original from the tennis ball. So now it starts telling me, where does that picture show up? There's our wonderful little Wikipedia. There's some more pictures of different kinds of tennis balls, but we can see right there is our one that we're looking at. And when you start going down here, you can start finding the history of the tennis ball. These will give you the Museum of London. This is where the actual tennis ball is, to start tracking down to figure out what you're doing. So reverse Google image search is fabulous. If you're looking at Pinterest, if you're bored one day and you're just Google searching for whatever it is that's got your attention, if you can find a picture of it, Google image search will first of all tell you if it's the real thing or if it's somebody's version of it. But it'll point you to those museums and those sources. While it may not be a valuable source itself, on this project in particular, I had to order a book from England, and the book that I ordered from England didn't have a whole lot of extra information in it. But while we're here, let's talk a little about it. But now, this isn't a scholarly article. So on a higher level project, probably not the best source, but it can give you places to start asking questions. This has some really good information about the history of the tennis ball and the origin of all this. This is the extent right here.
And the article may have references that you can use.
It absolutely will. And one of the things that I found out when I was looking at, let me make sure in chat. Okay, good. I started finding people that had been interviewed in some of these articles also. If it was just a magazine article, I found one of the 2 remaining guys in the United States that makes these type of real tennis balls still. So I was able to call and talk to him for a little while on the phone. It turns out he's Bram Stoker's grandson, which is kind of cool. But I got to talk to him a lot, and this is pretty much a lost art. This is a leather ball that is stuffed with dog hair. So let's riff on that for a second. Let's look at this picture. So one of the things that has bedeviled me on this project, when we look at this image, how many leaves is this made of? Like, how many pieces do you think I would have to cut out of leather to make this ball?
4.
Could be 8 if you had it split on that hemisphere there as well as this one.
It could be 1 with slices.
Yep. Here's a side picture. One of the sides. Now, this picture here, which I found these based on Google image search, starts to inform us a little bit, because now we can start to divide our tools from here. Based on the shape of that hole, I know this was a diamond awl that they were using. You can see very clearly the hair that's in there is dog hair. This is so scuffed, you really can't tell what the original texture of the ball was. And you can see the pins that were set in there for. And then there's another, the original front. Now, the fun part is I found 3 different primary or 3 different secondary sources describing this ball with patterns. One of them had a 4-leaf pattern. One of them had a 2-leaf pattern. There's 2 millimeters right there on either side in this picture that when you zoom way, way, way in, lead me to believe that the 2-leaf pattern is correct despite what the book I ordered from England says. But these are people that looked at this ball in the museum and rendered different opinions on how it's made. So this is where your conjecture in an art sci project starts to come in. I could justify, see, the interesting part is this circle hole right here is actually what I started using for orientation, because it also appears right here on this one. So you can start to turn it in 3-dimensional space. I bugged the museum so much about this that they actually stopped returning my emails. They finally told me it was in deep storage and to stop bothering them. That was right at the start of COVID too. So, they weren't going to go dig it out. But the point being that with that simple Google image search, this can start you down that rabbit hole. And so we have that. We talked about, let's see, we're starting to run up on the hour. So, all right. So we talked about the documentation.
We
It
aren't
doesn't-
exactly, just as a side note, we're not exactly limited on time. If we do go
Okay.
over, it's purely up to you as far as how long we go.
Okay, I for the people who had scheduled an hour, I just wanted to make sure we hit the high points so that if someone had to bail out, then we got all the questions answered. Key point number one, not a thesis. If you want to write a thesis, that's great. I would encourage you to do so, but it's probably not going to be the best medium for an art sci project, just simply because your judges aren't going to have time to read it. So brevity in your documentation is very good. If you want to come to one of the advanced classes, we can talk about how to capture some of that extra information, but I don't want to burden you guys with it now. Using this as a guide. If you don't want to write it on this paper, which I never do, I don't use this, but I use it as a guide on how I format my paper that I submit with my documentation. So your basic questions right there. And again, for the other kingdoms, you may have a version of this there. This is just Trimaris's most recent one. Knowing your art sci officer and your resources from there. Your divisions of categories. For those of us in Trimaris, right here is a step-by-step how to do it on that how to enter. Review the rules, choose your level, review the divisions and categories, download the form, and register your project for the last step. As far as other resources, the lending library is pretty much tired of seeing me also, because I'm asking them all the time for books that I don't have locally. Reference books can be really, really expensive. So your other Scadians are a great source of reference books. Odds are somebody you know either has it. Many of us are teachers or librarians and have access to research libraries. So asking your question either on your form in a submission if you want to follow up, or in any of the forums is a great place to do it. Because there may be somebody who's working at a library and they're bored and they don't mind taking a minute and researching some of your project. Make sure you credit them if they do that.
Social media.
So, sorry, go ahead.
Social media, Facebook is a good way of reaching out to people that may be knowledgeable in certain skills. And especially,
absolutely
you know,
is.
and you don't have to limit yourself to your kingdom. You can, you know, reach out, you know, to the media boards for art sci or to woodworking or brewing on a known world level. And if you find a laurel in your subject, congratulations, you've found a gold mine, and they can certainly help you and guide you and provide hopefully other resources and things that you can look deeper into. Of course, you're going to cite that conversation in your bibliography as well.
Now, I'll tell you something amusing there. How many of you guys know Talabes, the sitting Baron of Ancrosser right now?
Yes.
He is a deity level leather worker. And before I knew who he was, I'd been at events with him and didn't know who he was. But when I was starting out researching leatherworking, I was using almost just exclusively stuff that he and another gentleman in the foundational days of the SCA had done research together and published online. And it was great stuff. And so I cited him hundreds and hundreds of times in my work. And I happened to be sitting there one day talking with Master Miklos and Mistress Marie back when I first started the SEA, and they were our territorial barons here, Baron and Baroness. And I'm like, man, I would love to meet this guy because he's done everything I want to do. And Denise is like, you've never met him? No, I've never met him. I've read all of his stuff online. Well, he lives in Ancaster. I was like, wait, what? And the next event, there I am meeting the person whose research I had based my entire last 2 years of existence on. It was that close the whole time.
Can you talk a little bit about what it's like on Novice level during an ArtSci event?
So when you go to, it can either be a regional or you're at Kingdom ArtSci, display is kind of important. I don't like science fair backboards. I never really have, but setting up your piece on some type of nice display, again, within your awesome. Thank you for coming. If you have any more questions or need me, I'm on Facebook. You can hit me up, here anyway. I'm glad to be a resource for you.
Thank you.
But what was I saying? I'm sorry, I squirreled again. Oh, so setting up your object in a nice, if it's an illumination, putting it in a nice frame. If it's like, I know Guillermo does wood burning. So putting a nice tablecloth down and putting the object up there so it looks like it's on display, and having a couple copies of your documentation available to read. Since there are 3 judges, I usually put 3 copies of the documentation up there. Because as the judges, you're going to be assigned multiple pieces and you're only going to have a limited amount of time, especially if your judges are Laurels and they have to go to the Laurel meetings and they have to go to all the other commitments that they have. They're going to get just a brief window of time with your project. And having the documentation there, you can be there with your project if you wish to answer questions. I recommend it because it gives you an opportunity to talk to the judges, and it gives you an opportunity to see the types of things that they're looking at on your project. One of my favorite parts about judging is I learn about stuff that I don't know how to do myself. So I'll look at the item and I'll go, oh, wow, how did they do this? And I'll look in the documentation and, oh, that's cool. If I have the artisan there, even better. I love nothing more. I exist in ArtSci. I became the ArtSci officer because of the journeys in ArtSci. The learning process from A to Z is my favorite part. So talking with the artisan and what did you find out? What did you discover? What did you learn? They will, let me rewind this and say, if you're not interested in getting a score, but you are interested in either getting feedback or asking questions, you can enter your project for commentary only. You do not have to enter it for a competition. So you would simply note that on there. This is for, written commentary only. So don't think you have to go into this cutthroat competition with your project. If you don't want to, you can enter it for object we're inspired by has been stolen. So if we have records of it, but you don't have an extant to go by, is that what you're, okay. You can use as primary sources if there are drawings or blueprints or any renditions done of that object and the object is lost to time. You can use those as substitute primary sources. And that falls back under some of the conjecture. The other thing to be aware of on that line is not every historical object necessarily makes a good ArtSci project. You can make something and ask questions about it, but it doesn't necessarily lend itself to an ArtSci project. Awesome. Thank you for coming.
I'd like to point out that sometimes it is very beneficial to enter your project in perhaps multiple art size. You know, your first time you present it, maybe you want feedback, and so that you can improve your project and then continue to enter it at another level, or as a secondary, you know, for competition, now that you've gotten good feedback. So you're improving on your work.
So in Trimaris, you have a two-shot rule on a project. You can enter the same project twice. There need to, like he was saying, be some improvements or some design, some more research, something to further the project between time number 1 and time number 2. But you know, if I'm making this cup object, oh cool, it's invisible. If I'm making this invisible cup object as my art side project, and I enter it the first time, there we go. And then I refine it, I can enter it a second time. In fact, that tennis ball we were talking about is going to go back in as the second one for me. Jumping back over to the other, if you just can't find the primary sources on something and you've reached out for help and no one can help you on it, the object is lost to time. You've got an idea that the object existed, but you cannot find any hard data at all that indicate for sure materials, tools, methods. That may be something that might be fun to make, but may not be the best art sci entry. If you're looking for competition scores, if you're looking for written feedback, great entry. But if you're going on the competition side, you got to kind of call your shot on that one and go, is there actually enough existing evidence that I can draw hard conclusions from in order to enter this object? Yeah, that's a challenging one. You can probably get, are there existing pictures or drawings of the extant itself, even though the extant's gone? Yeah, then you could riff off the port or the yeah, absolutely. You could riff off the pictures of the portrait since it's gone, and that's still going to carry the same kind of weight. Jumping back to our other topic, I'll round that out since we're losing some folks now. When they're judging your piece, most judges I know don't mind if you're there. There's nothing in the rules that prohibit it. If there is, they'll let you know. If they have any questions, they can talk to you. They can answer their questions. They're probably not going to want to score it right in front of you, but they can. And then you enjoy your day. You hang out. Later on, after judging closes, they'll tell you a time to come back by and pick up your item. And you come by, pick it up, and you'll have score sheets that are there from your judges. Your judges will have their name, their contact information on there. So you can follow up with them later and ask, you know, what could I have done better? Why was this score this way? From personal experience, I don't recommend going head on with them. Just take my word for that. But it's okay to ask them and, you know, could you tell me what I could do better next time? Was it a documentation presentation? What did I do well? And almost every time I've submitted something to an art sci fair, I've had a Laurel in that area of specialization or someone that knew someone come up to me and go, hey, have you made contact with so-and-so because you guys should talk? So the networking there is absolutely fabulous, and it can get you hooked up with people that probably can answer questions. Or worst case scenario, you get a research partner that may be willing to look into it with you, you know? So anything left on the table? I know I threw a lot of information at you guys in a big hurry.
I have,
Sure, go ahead.
okay, I am totally new to SCA. So
Okay.
this may be a dumb question, I don't know.
Not at all.
I'm still figuring out my persona and my time period, all that kind of thing. So when you do a project for the arts and sciences, do you have to stay within whatever your persona lived, or you're just, the sky's the limit?
Sky's the limit. As long as it was within the period of time that the SCA covers, you're good to go.
1650 is the cutoff.
Yep. They
And
give you that 50-year grace period there. Because like if you do brewing, there are almost no written recipes before 1600. So a lot of the recipes for brewing come from that gray period, from 1600 to 1650. So no, the sky's the limit.
Awesome, thank you.
And welcome. I love seeing new art site people. That makes me so happy.
And I'd like to share a little vignette of a story. When I started wanting to do wood burning or pyrography, I was so eager and excited. And then I found out that I before I could even consider doing wood burning pyrography period wise, I needed a bellows because my lungs are only so strong. And and of course that meant I had to jump down a rabbit hole of how to build a bellows. So my very first wood burning project actually was a construction of a bellows, a hand bellows made out of 2 Tostones presses that I bought at Publix.
I love it.
And a copper tube that came from a refrigerator coolant system, and leather that I ripped off of a couch on the side of a street, and put it all together, and I had my own homemade bellows. And then I could start, and that was like 6 months later, of just constructing, the technology of a bellows. So, and I cherish that bellows to this day. So that was my first actual novice entry.
You bet. Thank you for coming. To riff off of that, at a novice level, would that have been expected? No. If you had gone and bought a fireplace bellows to use at novice level, that wouldn't have given you any heartburn at all. At master level, and maybe even if you're in journeyman level and people know who you are and know you're capable of a higher level of work, then that expectation may come to play a little bit. But at a novice level, nah, that level of going down the rabbit hole is not necessary. But it gives you an investment in your project, like he was saying, that is so very valuable. Another example is in brewing. Modernly, we can check the specific gravity of something to tell basically what the sugar concentration in it is. There are modern tools that you can use to do that. The 1600s tool to determine the specific gravity of your mead must was an egg. You dropped an egg in it, and when when a portion of the egg that was about the size of a coin of the day was floating, you were at the right spot. For my last brewing project, I actually decided to try that out, and I compared the must, where I eyeballed it with the egg test, against my hydrometer to check the specific gravity. You know what? It was pretty close. So it's kind of interesting, you can go from the very complex to the very simple. The other thing to be aware of is you can make your own tools, but if the period artisan didn't make their own tools, you're not expected to necessarily do it either. As a calligrapher, an illuminator, a scribe back in the day, I'm not going to go out and tan my own or prepare my own parchment. I'm going to go buy it. because there were people that did that as a function of the leather working process, and they had prepared sheets, and I would go and get it and finish preparing it to what I wanted to do. If I wanted to be a super overachiever in the SCA and go, sheep to shear and make my own parchment from a sheep and go all the way down that road, could I do it? Absolutely. I knew a brewer one time that went as far as to get chemical testing done of the water in London so he could actually modify the chemical composition of the tap water that he was using for the brewing project to get as close to London's water as he could. Like, you go, I ain't gonna do it. There's a category or an award called the non-peril that you can get at kingdom level competitions, and it basically means this item is as close to a museum piece as to be indistinguishable. They're pretty rare. There's usually only a couple of them at each Kingdom Arts event. At novice level, you're probably not going to get, I don't even think a novice level entry is eligible for one. I could be wrong. But your journeyman and your master level entries may be. But have I left any questions on the table? Have I thoroughly confused you now, run you off from Artsci for good?
No, this was excellent. We really appreciate you sharing it and putting it in such
Go ahead.
simple terms. Go ahead, Meg. Oh, I thought Meg wanted to say something. I'm sorry. But this is, I think this is going to be very helpful.
I am doing. I think we're crossing wires here. But I am also interested in brewing, and so I was wondering, sort of a side question, where you recommend doing research?
The first period recipe book that comes to mind is Digby. Let me find a link for you. I'm going to link it to you in your chat. This is kind of the extant, if you will, period brewing recipe for meads, beers. It's just slightly post period, but it's close enough to 1600 that it's kind of the go ahead. And this is a good spot to start as far as, and if you want to talk about this another time, I'm more than willing to, because I actually took this because I'm an overachiever and I am a research nut. Where everybody else likes making project and doesn't like doing the research, I'm the other way around. I'd rather research 100 projects and never actually make one. I took all the recipes that are in this book that are relative to mead, and I did an analysis of the ingredients and what the most frequent ingredients that appear throughout the book, to kind of come up with what the essential, if you will, Digby mead would look like. And I made one of the recipes out of this, and it actually led to more questions than answers for me. Because again, I'm a systems guy and I'm a modern brewer, and I'm like, why did it work that way? The timing of medieval brewing is interesting to me because I'm used to the mindset of I start a must, and as part of my recipe calculation, I know where it's going to end up on the sugar scale. I know how dry or how sweet it's going to end up, plus or minus. Can always stabilize and back sweeten if I need to. But when I did my first period mead out of this book, I made it at our regional arts and sciences fair. Well, 2 weeks before our regional, it tasted great. It was like, hey, this is pretty good. At regional, it was outstanding. And it won Crown's Acclaim for that. At Kingdom Artsci, a month and a half later, it was hot garbage.
Okay.
It tasted horrible. And so it was funny, and knowing, of course, modern meads, we let them sit for a couple years so that they can age out before we consider them ready. But it got me thinking about relative. Am I burning up everybody's time going down a rabbit hole again? I'm sorry. But the relative time from brewing to service of a period beverage, they drank them a lot younger for a lot of different reasons. That's my conjecture. I have some experiments I want to try, but if you want to collaborate on one, let me know.
Sure, absolutely.
But yeah, hopefully Digby's a great place to start. This will really start to get your attention, and then it's stuff like, do you have experience in brewing at all, or is it going to be brand new art for you?
I have some experience. I did meads a very long time ago. I've mostly done cordials lately. I am not a fan of beers, so I don't do beers at all.
Right on. Sorry, I've got a weird voicemail over there. It's really, it turns a lot of what you know about brewing on its ear, because sanitation, right? Except not so much, because in 1600 they would look at you nuts if you said something about sanitation anyways. And their fermentation vessels in a lot of cases were open stone vessels. So that takes my modern brewing mind and makes the sanitation portion just scream in abject terror. That also makes me afraid to do any wild yeast stuff and try to serve it to my judges, because Lord knows what I'll turn up with. But cool, yeah, if you want to go down that rabbit hole sometime, I'm more than happy to sit and talk with you about it. So
Okay.
Anybody else have any more questions? Anything I didn't cover that you were hoping to learn tonight?
Do you have a good starting point for woodworking? I'm brand new to the SCA.
So we can track down some. In fact, Geese probably got more woodworking contacts than I have off the top of my head, because it comes real close to his pyrography. Plus, we just have more laurels in South Florida than we do North. But we can get you in contact with some folks that can point you in the right direction on that.
There is a Facebook. Oh,
You are muted.
Yeah, you're muted again.
Egnabbit. There is a Facebook woodworking group, and reaching out, probably in your kingdom, just doing searches. And also in the SCA woodworking would expand you to the known world. And just saying, hey, I'm new, I want to do woodworking. Are there any laurels in woodworking? Putting those kinds of announcements on your kingdom level, you'll be surprised. It's just a handy way of networking.
Yeah, you could jump out in Trimaris Populous even and go, hi, new to Trimaris. Are there any woodworking folks that wouldn't mind, pinging me off the thread? And you'll have people tripping over themselves shortly to get in contact with you. So
cool.
It's actually a small world.
Seems pretty big.
And I'll say this on the lace thing also. I know at this point in our life that most of us are probably over Zoom, especially as we start getting to the point where we can start doing stuff in person again. But to me, one of the blessings that has come out of the pandemic is it's really opened up the known world to each other beyond what I would have expected. I've taught this class to 3 or 4 people at local events, at Kingdom events, and it's rare that there's somebody from out of Trimaris there. So already tonight we had 3 or 4 people from various parts of the known world here.
I'm sure more than that. We didn't go through the Mickey Mouse roll.
Yeah, I'm in Wyoming.
Yep, there you go. So, this has given us a new way to interact with folks. My Laurel lives down in Central Florida, so it's a 5-hour drive to talk to them. But we can get onto Zoom and I can do a screen share on what I'm working on, or we can do FaceTime and look at the stuff, and we don't have to wait for a big event in order to interact and learn from each other. So I am grateful for that portion of this, that it's opened the scope beyond, you know, the frozen north of Florida, if you will.
Thank you so much, Sir Honorable Lord Augustine, for your
bet.
support and your time. I know we went well over an hour, but I think
I don't mind.
I think it was well worth it. And especially since we have so many participants still with us.
Yep.
So I think everybody knows how to reach you now. So if they have any individual questions, they can PM you. Thank you so much,
I'm
everybody.
always here to help. So
I'm going to turn
Yeah.
off the recording